time together. This time they were playing hide and seek. No one could have guessed how badly it would end. It all started with George not being the best player. He decided to hide under the table. Peppa immediately found him and scolded him for hiding poorly, saying that next time he needed to find a better place. Next time he was hiding, he decided to find the most unexpected place. He thought he would definitely win. His parents encouraged him, and he went to find a place to hide. He ran into his parents' room and saw a quite tall vase. He figured that if he could fit in there, Peppa wouldn't be able to find him. He brought a chair, stood on it, and began to climb into the vase head first. However, he couldn't. He got stuck upside down, unable to get out. He started to worry and was about to call for help, but he thought if he could just squeeze a bit further, he could flip over into the wider bottom of the vase. He squeezed as much as he could, exhaling the remaining air from his lungs. He pushed a bit further, but not all the way. The situation only got worse. He realized he couldn't get out and tried to scream but couldn't. There was no air left in his lungs, and he couldn't even breathe properly because his body was compressed. His heart pounded from anxiety, worsening the situation because the vase had limited oxygen, which was quickly depleting over time. He waited and waited for Peppa to find him. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Peppa entered the room and saw the top part of George sticking out of the vase. Peppa was happy that she had found him and laughed at him for choosing a conspicuous hiding spot again. However, George didn't react at all. He didn't move his legs or make any sounds. Peppa realized something was wrong. She stood on a chair and tried to reach him with her hands, but the vase slipped and fell to the ground, shattering. Peppa watched as her motionless brother lay among the vase shards, the shards embedded in his hands, legs, stomach and face. A red puddle quickly formed on the floor. Peppa immediately screamed, calling for their parents' help. They were shocked and rushed George to the hospital. He received numerous stitches, lay in a coma for several days, but he survived. Scars remained on his body, reminding him of that day. He no longer... Peppa and George loved playing together outside, but on this day, leaving the house was the worst decision. The storm caused terrible losses to their family. That day, Peppa went with George for a picnic outside. They took toys with them, and under the sunny weather, they ate cookies with juice. As soon as they finished, they heard thunder. A storm was approaching, and Mummy Pig called them to go home as quickly as possible. Daddy Pig wasn't worried about it, but the sky was getting darker and darker. But then it turned out that Peppa had left a toy in the garden, and Daddy Pig went to retrieve it, not thinking about his safety. He went down to the toy, and then lightning struck. Lightning struck a tree he was standing too close to. He fell unconscious. His family watched this happen. Peppa and George were scared, and Mummy Pig ran to call an ambulance. But when she dialed the number, she realized that the connection wasn't working because of the storm. She told Peppa to stay at home, and she herself ran to Daddy Pig. He lay unconscious under the cold rain, but he had a pulse. Mummy Pig was glad that he was alive. She thought she could carry him home. But when she tried to pull him home, she couldn't do it. He weighed too much, and the path home was slippery from the rain. She could never have carried him up the hill to the house. Mummy Pig ran to the nearest neighbors, leaving George and Peppa alone. They sat at home and shuddered at every roll of thunder. Meanwhile, Daddy Pig was still alive. He began to regain consciousness, but was paralyzed. Because the rain didn't stop, a puddle began to form under him. When Mummy Pig tried to move him, she left him face down. Now, in addition to hypothermia from the cold and wetness, his face was pressed right into the mud. It was getting harder for him to breathe. Almost an hour later, the storm had already ended, and at that time, Mummy Pig came with Dr. Brown Bear. But Daddy Pig was no longer breathing. After a long time, Mummy Pig continues to blame herself for this, and Peppa and George will never stop. When the snowflakes begin to fall from the sky, and the streets and houses are gradually wrapped in snow, Peppa Pig's family feels the unique atmosphere of the upcoming Christmas. During these moments, Peppa likes to spend time with her beloved brother George. However, from that day on, she would never be able to play with him again. This is the story of a missing person, the investigation of which dragged on for several months. It all started with unremarkable snow. Peppa and George ran outside to play in the snow. They were enjoying the winter. The snow was very deep that day. After they had played enough, they decided to return home. But George did not go in. When Peppa had lunch, she decided to go back outside and saw a big snowball. She realized that George had started building the snowman without her, but most likely got tired and went home. She completed the snowman with head, and then came to her room to show the snowman to George, but he wasn't there. She got worried and told her parents. The parents went to look for George. They couldn't find George. When they called the police, the investigation has begun. The police could not find any traces of George due to the fact that the parents had already trampled around while searching. They could only find the blue hat left by George. A month passed, followed by another, but no one could find George. What made him run away? And where is he now? When Peppa went home, he decided to return for some reason, but the way out of the house goes down the slope. He fell during the descent. Due to the slope of the mountain, he did not stop when falling and began to tumble down the mountain. Snow began to stick to him, gradually forming a ball. When that ball of snow with George inside stopped, George couldn't even move. He could barely breathe. He was lying without oxygen, unable to move and in the freezing cold. It's a terrible situation. He was probably alive when Peppa was building the snowman, but he couldn't call for help from Peppa, who was decorating the snowman in the meantime. No one has touched the snowman since then. However, it could not stand forever. And one warm spring morning, Peppa went for a walk and saw her brother. Since then, she has been afraid of snowmen, of what might lurk inside them.